Hello everyone! Today I'm going to talk about SpaceX Starship and all about how it works. TM. Now we are going to dive really deep into this topic, and that means it is going to be a big video, so timestamps will be in the description and the comment section. Without further ado, let us commence forth. Now, in case you have been living under a rock for the past 5 to 6 years, SpaceX is currently working on getting people back to the moon and even to Mars with their vehicle Starship, which is 122 meters tall, 9 meters wide, and is capable of putting 150 tons into low Earth orbit. So I would say it is a pretty big boy launch vehicle. Now, if you're wondering what happened in those past 5 to 6 years, I have an upcoming video all about Starship's history, so do not fret. Now let's talk about the upper stage. The upper stage is arguably the most complicated part of the rocket. It also has a lot of variants. The crewed version, which carries crew, the cargo version, which carries cargo like satellites, the tanker version, which carries a bit of extra fuel instead of crew or cargo, the lunar lander version, which will be used in NASA's Artemis program, the deep space version, which will just go to deep space and will not have flaps or sea level engines, and the prototype versions, which do not have any type of heat shielding and are just used for high altitude flights, mostly in our atmosphere. We're going to focus more on the crewed, cargo, and tanker versions. Now let us start with the top of the vehicle. Now, at the top of the vehicle, we have the nose cone, in which the crew would sit if this was the crewed version. We would call this the pressure vessel because, well, it is pressurized so the crew can live. With the cargo version, we have a giant cargo bay that opens its doors like an alligator opens its jaws. Both the crewed and cargo version house almost 1,000 cubic meters of volume, which is huge, like more volume than your standard airliner. Wow! The nose cone is made out of stainless steel on one side, while the other side is covered in heat shield tiles so it doesn't explode while re-entering Earth's atmosphere. Now, below we have the tank section. It contains the methane tank and the liquid oxygen tank. That's because the engines run on methane and oxygen. Now, there are two special things about this tank section. First of all, we have this thing called autogenous pressurization. According to Wikipedia, autogenous pressurization is the use of self-generated gaseous propellant to pressurize liquid propellant in rockets. Basically, it pumps gaseous fuel or oxidizer back into the main fuel or oxidizer tank to maintain proper tank pressure. It does this so it doesn't have to use helium for pressure, which you can't really find on Mars. The other special thing about this tank section is header tanks. Now, these are smaller tanks reserved mostly for the landing phase. The methane header tank is seated in the main methane tank, while the liquid oxygen tank is seated at the top of the vehicle in the nose cone with a pipe going from the liquid oxygen header tank to the main liquid oxygen tank. I would say that is pretty cool. Now, Starship has these flappy boys that we would call flaps. Two smaller flaps are seated at the top of the nose cone and two bigger ones on the bottom of the tank section. Now, these are not wings. They are not there to provide lift. They are there to provide a drag. During re-entry, the flappy boys fall to almost 60 degrees. They do that to provide a drag and slow the vehicle down and protect the vehicle from the scorching heat of re-entry. Now, after the rocket hopefully survives re-entry, it will orient itself belly first, this time with its belly facing the ground. Now this makes it slow down even more, but not enough to softly touch down. So it does this sick belly flop to tail down maneuver. Basically, it activates its engines while it's oriented belly first, then flips to the horizontal position, landing almost like Falcon 9 would. Now, these engines that it ignites are one of the most complicated and powerful engines ever. They are called the Raptor engines. They use what is called a full flow staged combustion cycle. Now, in order to understand this, I am going to give you a simple rundown of rocket engine cycles. You all know the Merlin engine, right? It's the Falcon 9 first and second stage engine. Well, it uses what is called an open cycle. Basically, below the propellant tanks, we have two turbopumps, a pre-burner and a turbine. Pre-burner meaning basically a smaller rocket engine which exhaust spins the turbine, which in turn the turbine spins the two turbopumps. The turbopumps take the two fuels to a higher pressure. The two high pressure fuels now meet in the combustion chamber where, you guessed it, combustion happens. The full flow stage combustion cycle takes two different preburners and two different pumps, one for each propellant, making both propellants arrive in the combustion chamber as gases, resulting in a big boost in power and efficiency. The Raptor engine produces 2,210 kilonewtons of thrust and can throttle down to almost 40%. It has a thrust-to-weight ratio goal of 200 and a specific impulse of 330 seconds. Now, Starship has 6 of these engines, 3 that are sea level optimized and 3 that are vacuum optimized. Now, this does not stop here, of course. Starship has aft cargo. What is aft cargo, you may ask? It is basically unpressurized portions of a spacecraft used for cargo, kind of like the trunk on Dragon 1 and 2. I think aft cargo is pretty important since SpaceX plans to colonize Mars, and they need some extra cargo for colonization. And of course, we have landing legs, used for landing, I guess. And to top it all off, Starship has also a reaction control system. What is a reaction control system, you may ask? It's a bunch of tiny little rockets on the big rocket that fire in order to provide stability. Remember when I talked earlier about gaseous methane and oxygen earlier? That gaseous methane and oxygen is also going to be used for the reaction control system, and I think that's really epic. And that was just the second stage. Let's go on to the first stage. Now, the first stage is called the Super Heavy Booster and is 70 meters in height, and it's almost as tall as an entire Falcon 9. It's much simpler than the second stage, of course. At the top, it has the control/avionics unit. Like the Falcon 9, it has these grid fins, only these are huge, like really big. We have the tank section, which has the methane and oxygen tanks. It also has the header tanks, instead of the main tanks, of course, also reserved for the landing phase. At the bottom, we have the Raptor engines. A lot of Raptor engines. It has between 28 and 37 engines. Now, the layout of engines forms out of rings of engines. The outer ring of engine has non-deep throttling booster variants of Raptor engines that are much powerful than the regular ones. The inner rings have normal variants of Raptor engines. The inner rings are, of course, used for landing. Speaking of landing, the booster has 3 ways of landing: land landing, drone ship landing, and catcher system landing. Now, in order to save mass on the vehicle on some launches, they will not use landing legs, but instead use this catcher system that relies on the grid fins to support the weight of the vehicle. Now, in order for you, the viewer, to understand this better, I have simulated a Starship launch in Kerbal Space Program. Let's go watch it. Now, here we have a SpaceX Starship right on the launch pad. You can see its engine spooling up and then it launches. Look at those beautiful plumes there from the waterfall mode if you are interested. Now here we can see the Super Heavy Booster and the SpaceX Starship going through the atmosphere, and the spacecraft portion detaches and uses its Raptor vacuum engines to get into a stable orbit. Now we can see the Starship circularize its orbit, but right after that we can see our Super Heavy Booster doing its entry burn so it doesn't tear itself to pieces, and now it's, well, supposed to land. In a few short moments you will see the plume and the smoke coming from the rocket and deflecting on the water. Now here it comes, and there we have it. There's some smoke and a soft touchdown. Now after the Starship orbits, it will of course deorbit. You can see the flames of re-entry here as it re-enters Kerbin's atmosphere. Pretty cool, I would say. Now here we have the SpaceX Starship safely landing with 2 of its 3 Raptor engines. You can see the smoke on the ground, and, well, would you look at that? We have a soft touchdown in the middle of nowhere. Now, of course, SpaceX would land it back at the Kennedy Space Center of Boca Chica, but still, soft touchdown, yay! Now, that was the end of the video. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing and liking. Thank you for watching again, and I will see you next time. Bye!